a whisper, barely louder than the turning of an old page. Good evening, dear listener. I am Professor Salamander, and tonight I invite you into one of those curious mysteries that hides not in darkness, but in the quiet corners of a familiar castle. Beyond the glow of common room fires and the comfort of ancient stone, something subtle has begun to stir. So settle in, listen closely, and let us follow the faintest thread of magic into the unknown. The evening wind moved softly through the high windows of Hogwarts, carrying with it the quiet hush that came only after a long day of lessons. The castle, so often alive with chatter and hurried footsteps, had settled into a gentler rhythm. Candles flickered along the stone walls, and the distant murmur of voices faded into a calm, comforting silence. In the Gryffindor common room, however, one corner still burned bright with purpose. Hermione Granger sat at a small table near the fire, her books spread out in careful order, parchment neatly stacked, and a single steaming cauldron resting on a heat-proof stand before her. The golden light of the flames danced across her focused face as she stirred the potion within with precise, measured movements. It shimmered faintly, a soft silver glow rising in slow spirals like mist over a quiet lake. Hermione paused, narrowing her eyes as she checked her notes. 3 clockwise stirs, then half a pinch of crushed moonstone, she murmured to herself, her voice low but steady. Not too much, or it deepens the effect beyond safe limits. She reached for a small vial and carefully added the ingredient. The potion responded at once, its glow settling into a calm, steady sheen. Satisfied, she allowed herself a small nod. Across the room, sprawled in armchairs far too comfortable for studying, Harry and Ron watched her with a mixture of admiration and mild exhaustion. You know, Ron said, shifting slightly as he poked at the fire with a long stick. Most people would call it a night by now. Hermione didn't look up. Most people aren't attempting advanced potion modification for Newt-level research. Ron sighed. Right, of course they're not. Harry leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. What exactly is that one supposed to do again? Hermione finally glanced at them, her expression softening just a little. It's a refined sleeping potion. Safer, more stable, and easier to wake from. Professor Slughorn mentioned that most standard drafts can be unpredictable if brewed incorrectly. I thought I might improve on that. Ron raised an eyebrow. Improve it? It already knocks people out, doesn't it? Seems like it's doing its job. That's precisely the problem, Hermione replied. It doesn't just make someone sleep. It can make them sleep too deeply. This version is meant to be gentler, controlled, reversible without difficulty. Harry studied the softly glowing potion. So, it's safer. Exactly. She turned back to her work, jotting down a few final notes. The scratching of her quill was the only sound for a moment. Then, quite unexpectedly, the portrait hole swung open. Neville Longbottom stepped inside, looking slightly out of breath. His hair was rumpled, and there was a hint of worry in his eyes. Hermione, he said quickly, spotting her at once. I was hoping you'd still be awake. She straightened at once. Neville? What is it? He hesitated, glancing briefly at Harry and Ron before continuing. It's Dean. He won't wake up. The room seemed to grow still. What do you mean he won't wake up? Harry asked, rising from his seat. Neville stepped closer, lowering his voice. He fell asleep in the dormitory not long ago. We thought he was just tired, but we tried shaking him, calling his name, even a mild waking charm. Nothing worked. Hermione's expression changed at once. The calm certainty in her eyes sharpened into concern. Did he drink anything unusual? She asked quickly. Any potions? Food from outside the Great Hall? I don't know, Neville admitted. That's why I came to you. Ron stood up now as well, his earlier laziness gone. Blimey, that's not normal, is it? No, Hermione said firmly. It's not. She moved at once, extinguishing the flame beneath her cauldron with a swift flick of her wand and sealing the potion with care. Then she gathered a small kit of vials and tools, slipping them into her bag with practiced speed. Take me to him, she said. The four of them climbed the stairs quickly, their footsteps echoing faintly in the quiet tower. The usual warmth of Gryffindor felt different now. Tense, uncertain. When they reached the boys' dormitory, they found Seamus Finnegan pacing near one of the beds. He's still out, Seamus said, running a hand through his hair. We've tried everything short of dumping a bucket of water on him. Hermione moved straight to the bedside. Dean Thomas lay still beneath the covers, his breathing slow and steady. At first glance, he appeared perfectly peaceful, merely asleep. But something about it was wrong. Hermione leaned closer, studying him carefully. She gently lifted one of his hands, then let it fall. There was no response. She whispered a soft, diagnostic charm. A faint shimmer passed over Dean's body, and lingered. Her brow furrowed. This isn't natural sleep, she said quietly. Harry stepped closer. What is it then? Hermione hesitated, her mind already racing through possibilities. It feels like a potion-induced state, she said slowly. But deeper than it should be? Ron frowned. Like your potion? Hermione's head snapped up at once. No, she said, perhaps a bit too quickly. Mine isn't strong enough to do this, and I haven't given it to anyone. But even as she spoke, a flicker of unease crossed her face. She reached into her bag and took out a small vial of clear liquid. Carefully, she tipped a single drop onto Dean's lips. They waited. Nothing happened. Hermione's heart sank slightly. That should have triggered a mild waking response, she said, even in deep magical sleep. Neville swallowed. So, what does that mean? Hermione straightened slowly, her grip tightening around her wand. It means, she said, her voice quieter now, that whatever caused this is more powerful than a standard sleeping potion. The firelight flickered across the room, casting long shadows against the walls. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Harry broke the silence. Can you fix it? Hermione didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted briefly toward her bag, toward the sealed cauldron resting inside. I don't know, she admitted at last, but I'm going to find out. Outside, the wind brushed once more against the castle walls. And deep within Hogwarts, something unseen had already begun to stir. Morning came to Hogwarts not with its usual brightness, but with a quiet unease that drifted through the corridors like a whisper no one could quite catch. Word had spread. By the time Hermione, Harry, and Ron reached the Great Hall, the long house tables were filled with murmured conversations. Students leaned close together, voices hushed, glancing toward the teacher's table and then back again. Even the enchanted ceiling, pale with early light, seemed dimmer than usual. He's still asleep, Ron muttered, tearing a piece of toast without much appetite. Seamus said nothing's changed. Hermione nodded, though she had hardly slept at all. I expected as much. Whatever this is, it isn't simple. Harry looked towards the staff table, where Professor McGonagall sat in stern silence, speaking quietly with Madame Pomfrey. They know, then. They must, Hermione replied, and if Madame Pomfrey hasn't woken him by now. She did not finish the thought. At that moment, the doors of the Great Hall opened again. A pair of Hufflepuff students entered, supporting a third between them, his head lolled forward, his feet dragging slightly along the floor. A ripple of alarm spread instantly. "Another one," someone whispered. Hermione rose at once, her chair scraping softly against the stone floor. Harry and Ron followed without question. They met the Hufflepuffs halfway across the hall. "What happened?" Hermione asked quickly. "He just collapsed," one of them said, clearly shaken. "In the corridor. We thought he tripped, but then he wouldn't wake up." Hermione reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against the boy's wrist. His pulse was steady. Too steady. Just like Dean. Professor McGonagall was already descending from the staff table, her robes sweeping behind her. "Miss Granger," she said, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. "What have you observed?" Hermione straightened. "It matches the condition we saw last night, Professor. Deep magical sleep, resistant to basic countermeasures." Madame Pomfrey stepped forward briskly. "Bring him to the hospital wing at once." As the boy was carried away, the Great Hall fell into an uneasy silence. McGonagall's gaze lingered on Hermione. "You will come as well." The hospital wing, usually a place of recovery and quiet reassurance, had taken on a different air entirely. Dean lay in one bed, unmoving. Now, the Hufflepuff boy, Ernie Macmillan, had been placed beside him, his breathing just as slow, just as unnaturally calm. Hermione stood at the foot of the beds, watching as Madame Pomfrey worked swiftly, administering charms and potions in practiced sequence. One by one, they failed. "It's no use," Madame Pomfrey said at last, her voice tight with frustration. "I've seen cursed sleep before, but this is unusually persistent." Professor McGonagall folded her arms. "Miss Granger believes it may be potion-related." Madame Pomfrey turned sharply. Potion-related? That would imply someone administered it deliberately. Hermione hesitated only a moment. "Or unknowingly," she said. "If it were altered, disguised as something harmless." McGonagall's expression darkened. "You suspect tampering?" "I suspect," Hermione replied carefully, "that this is not an accident." The words seemed to settle heavily in the room. Harry shifted beside her. "Then someone's going around putting students to sleep?" "Not necessarily directly," Hermione said. "If it's in something shared, a drink perhaps, or a potion used in class." Ron frowned. "But why? What's the point?" That Hermione could not yet answer. Madame Pomfrey moved away from the beds, shaking her head. "Until I know what I'm dealing with, I can do little more than keep them stable." McGonagall turned back to Hermione. "If this is indeed a matter of potions, then Professor Slughorn must be informed immediately." Hermione nodded. "Of course." But even as she agreed, a thought stirred uneasily in her mind. Her own work. Her refined sleeping potion. Carefully controlled, precisely measured. Safe. She swallowed slightly. "Professor," she said, "may I examine the victims more closely? I believe I might detect traces others could miss." McGonagall regarded her for a long moment, then inclined her head. "You may." Hermione stepped forward again, drawing her wand. She murmured a more complex diagnostic spell this time, one she had studied only recently. A faint golden shimmer passed over Dean and Ernie, lingering longer than before. Hermione watched intently. "There," just at the edges, something flickered. Not quite right. A residue of magic, thin as mist, but unmistakable. Her breath caught. It was familiar. Not identical, but close enough to send a chill through her. "No," she whispered under her breath. Harry leaned in. "What is it?" Hermione hesitated. Then, very quietly, she said, "There's a signature here, a magical trace left behind by the potion." Ron blinked. "And?" Hermione looked up at them, her expression troubled. "And it's similar to mine." Silence fell. Harry stared at her. "You mean your sleeping potion?" "It can't be exactly the same," Hermione said quickly. "This is stronger, altered somehow. But the base structure, the magical foundation, it resembles my work." Ron let out a low whistle. "That's not good." "No," Hermione agreed, her voice steady but tense. "It isn't." McGonagall stepped closer. "Miss Granger, are you suggesting that your research has been misused?" Hermione met her gaze. "I think," she said slowly, "that someone has taken my potion and changed it." The weight of the realization settled heavily over them all. Somewhere within Hogwarts, hidden behind familiar walls and trusted faces, someone had taken something meant to heal and twisted it into something dangerous. And worse still, they might not be finished. A quiet dread took root in Hermione's thoughts as she left the hospital wing. It followed her down the winding staircases of Hogwarts, through corridors that had once felt safe and known, and into the very rhythm of the day itself. Now every shadow seemed to hold a question, and every passing student a possibility. Someone had taken her work. Not merely copied it, but changed it. And worse, they understood it well enough to make it dangerous. Hermione walked quickly, her robes sweeping behind her, Harry and Ron close at her side. "We need to see Slughorn," Harry said. "If anyone can tell us what's been done to it, it's him." Hermione nodded, though her thoughts were already racing ahead. "Yes, but before that, I want to check something." Ron groaned softly. "Please tell me it doesn't involve more homework?" "It involves my notes," Hermione said firmly, "and my potion." That silenced him. They turned toward Gryffindor Tower, climbing the familiar staircase. The fat lady allowed them through with a concerned look, having clearly heard the whispers that now spread through the castle. Inside, the common room was far quieter than usual. Small clusters of students spoke in hushed tones, and more than one glance followed Hermione as she crossed the room. She ignored them. At once, she moved to the corner where she had worked the night before. Her table remained as she had left it, neat, orderly, untouched. Or so it seemed. Hermione knelt beside her bag and drew out the small cauldron, still sealed. Her fingers hesitated only a moment before she broke the protective charm and lifted the lid. A faint silver glow rose once more. At first glance, the potion appeared unchanged. But Hermione did not trust appearances. She took a small glass vial and carefully collected a sample. Then, with deliberate precision, she whispered a testing charm over it. The liquid shimmered, shifted, and then darkened, just slightly. But enough. Hermione froze. "No," she breathed. Harry leaned closer. "What is it?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached for her notes, flipping through pages with growing urgency. Diagrams, measurements, adjustments, all carefully recorded in her neat handwriting. Everything was exactly as she had written it. But the The potion was not exactly as she had made it. "It's been altered," she said at last, her voice low. Ron blinked. "But you sealed it, didn't you?" "I did," Hermione said. "And yet—" She held the vial up to the light. The silver glow now seemed colder, sharper. "Someone has tampered with it," she finished. A silence fell between them. Harry's expression hardened. "When?" Hermione shook her head. "It must have been last night, after I finished, before we went upstairs." Ron frowned. "But we were all here. We would have seen someone, wouldn't we?" Hermione's gaze drifted slowly around the room. Students sat in their usual places, chairs, tables, the great fireplace, everything as it had always been. And yet, not quite. "Not necessarily," she said quietly. "If they knew how to avoid notice, or used a disillusionment charm." Harry exhaled slowly. "So someone was here, watching you, waiting." Hermione closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. "Yes," she said, "and they knew exactly what to change." She turned back to the table, her mind already working through the implications. "The base structure is still mine," she continued. "That's why the magical trace matches. But they've added something that deepens the effect, makes the sleep stronger, harder to break." Ron shifted uneasily. "How much stronger?" Hermione met his gaze. "Strong enough that Madame Pomfrey can't wake them," she said. That was answer enough. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Harry said, "We need to find out what was added." "Yes," Hermione agreed, "and quickly, if more students are affected." She did not finish the thought, but the meaning was clear. Ron ran a hand through his hair. "Right. So we go to Slughorn, tell him everything, and what? Hope he recognizes it?" "It's a start," Hermione said, "but there's something else." She hesitated. Harry watched her closely. "What?" Hermione looked down at her notes, her fingers resting lightly on the page. "The change, it's subtle," she said. "Too subtle for guesswork. Whoever did this didn't experiment blindly. They knew exactly how to modify the potion without destabilizing it." Ron's eyes widened slightly. "You mean someone good at potions?" Hermione nodded. "Very good." A flicker of unease passed between them. There were not many students at Hogwarts who could match Hermione's skill in that subject. Fewer still who would dare to twist her work into something harmful. Harry's voice was quiet now. "Do you think it's someone in our year?" Hermione did not answer immediately. Instead, she carefully resealed the cauldron, her movements precise but tense. "I don't know," she said at last, "but they had access, and knowledge, and a reason." Ron frowned. "What kind of reason involves putting people into a cursed sleep?" Hermione looked toward the window, where pale daylight filtered through the glass. "That," she said softly, "is what we have to find out." A distant bell rang through the castle, signaling the start of the next lesson. But none of them moved. Because somewhere within Hogwarts, unseen and patient, someone had already taken the next step. And Hermione could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The corridors of Hogwarts no longer felt like pathways of learning, but threads in a tightening web. Hermione moved through them with quiet urgency, her thoughts sharp, her purpose clear. Harry and Ron followed close behind as they made their way toward the dungeons, where Professor Slughorn held his potions lessons. Students stepped aside as they passed, their whispers trailing behind like drifting leaves. "Another one in Hufflepuff." They say it's cursed. No one can wake them. Hermione kept her gaze forward. Fear, she knew, spread faster than truth. When they reached the potions classroom, the heavy door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the low murmur of bubbling cauldrons and subdued conversation filled the dimly lit space. The familiar scent of herbs and simmering ingredients hung thick in the air. Professor Slughorn stood at the front, peering into a cauldron with great interest. At first glance, it was an ordinary lesson, but the tension beneath it was unmistakable. Students worked more quietly than usual, casting uneasy glances at one another. Slughorn looked up as the trio entered. "Ah, Miss Granger," he said, though his usual warmth was touched with concern. "I was just about to begin, though I dare say we have other matters pressing upon us." Hermione stepped forward without hesitation. "Professor, I need your help," she said. "It's urgent." Slughorn's expression shifted at once. Yes, of course. Come here." He gestured her to the front table. Harry and Ron lingered nearby as Hermione carefully set down her vial. "This," she said, "is a sample of a potion I've been developing, a modified sleeping draught." Slughorn's eyes lit briefly with interest. "Ambitious. Very ambitious." "It's been tampered with," Hermione continued. "And I believe it's connected to the students who have fallen asleep." At once, his demeanor changed. He leaned closer, his round face tightening with focus. "Let me see." He took the vial and held it up to the dim light. For a moment, he said nothing, only turning it slowly between his fingers. Then, with a murmured incantation, he cast a series of diagnostic spells over the liquid. The potion shimmered, shifted, and then settled again. Slughorn's brows drew together. "Well now," he muttered, "this is quite something." Hermione watched him intently. "What do you see?" He did not answer at once. Instead, he reached for a small silver spoon and dipped it lightly into the vial, observing the way the liquid clung to it. "Your base," he said slowly, "is excellent, balanced, controlled, just as you intended, I imagine." Hermione nodded. "Yes. But this," he continued, tapping the side of the vial, "this addition is not yours." "No," Hermione said. "That's what I need to understand." Slughorn sighed softly, setting the vial down. "It's been strengthened," he said. "Deepened. Not through brute force, mind you. That would have made it unstable. But through refinement. Whoever altered this knew precisely what they were doing." Ron shifted uneasily. "So, it's not just some random student messing about, then?" Slughorn gave a short, humorless chuckle. "My dear boy, no. This is not the work of chance." Hermione felt a chill settle over her. "Can you identify the ingredient?" she asked. Slughorn hesitated. "Not immediately," he admitted. "But I can tell you this, it's rare, subtle. It binds with the potion rather than overpowering it." Harry frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Slughorn said, his voice lowering, "that it doesn't simply make the potion stronger. It changes how it behaves." Hermione's mind raced. "Changes it? How?" Slughorn looked at her gravely. "It anchors the sleep," he said, "locks it in place, makes it resistant to interruption." A heavy silence followed. Hermione felt her breath catch. "That's why they won't wake," she said. Slughorn nodded. "Yes," he said. "And unless the exact countermeasure is known, they may not wake at all." Ron went pale. "You mean, they could stay like that forever?" Slughorn did not answer directly. But his silence was answer enough. Hermione steadied herself, forcing her thoughts back into motion. "There must be a way to reverse it," she said. "Every potion has a counter." "In theory," Slughorn replied, "but only if one knows precisely what has been added." Hermione's gaze sharpened. "Then we find out." Slughorn regarded her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Yes," he said. "We must." He turned back to the vial, studying it once more. "There is something else," he added. Hermione's attention snapped to him. "What?" Slughorn hesitated, as though choosing his words with care. "The magic within this potion," he said slowly, "carries a trace, not merely of its maker, but of its intent." Harry frowned. "Intent?" "Yes," Slughorn said. "Most potions reflect their purpose, but this one has been altered with remarkable precision. There is no excess, no instability, no error." Hermione felt a growing unease. "What are you saying?" Slughorn looked up at her. "I am saying," he replied quietly, "that this was not done in haste, nor in ignorance." The room seemed to grow colder. "This was deliberate." Hermione's hands tightened slightly at her sides. "Then whoever did this," she said, "planned it." Slughorn inclined his head. "Yes," he said, "and likely prepared for it well in advance." Ron let out a slow breath. "Brilliant. So we're dealing with a clever, secretive poisoner who can knock people out without being seen." "Not poison," Hermione said at once. "Not exactly." She looked again at the vial, her mind turning over the possibilities. "It doesn't harm them directly," she continued. "It traps them, holds them in sleep." Harry glanced at her. Which might be worse? Hermione did not argue. Instead, she straightened, resolve hardening in her expression. "Professor," she said, "I need access to the restricted potion texts. Anything that deals with binding agents or deep sleep enchantments." Slughorn raised an eyebrow. Ambitious again. "Necessary," Hermione replied. He studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Very well," he said. "I will arrange it." Relief flickered briefly across Hermione's face, but it did not last. Because even as they spoke, a thought lingered at the edge of her mind. A quiet, troubling realization. Whoever had done this had not only stolen her work, they had improved it. And that meant they were not merely hiding in the shadows. They were watching, waiting, and perhaps already preparing the next move. By evening, Hogwarts had changed. The castle was still the same in stone and shadow, still crowned with towers and warmed by candlelight, yet something unseen had settled over it. Doors closed more quickly. Conversations ended when footsteps approached. Laughter, where it appeared at all, rose thin and brief, as though uncertain of its place. Even Peeves seemed less noisy, gliding through the passages with an odd watchfulness, delighted perhaps by the disorder, yet wary of it too. Hermione felt the change in every corridor she crossed. She, Harry, and Ron had spent the latter half of the day in the library, not at the usual tables where students bent over essays and translation charts, but in the quieter far corner where Madame Pince kept a stern eye on anyone handling advanced material. Slughorn had sent a brief note granting Hermione temporary access to several difficult texts, and they now lay open before her in a careful semicircle. Somnolent drafts and their reversals, uncommon potion binding agents, and the especially ancient A Compendium of Restorative Brewing. Ron looked as though the books themselves had tired him. "I still don't understand," he muttered, staring at a diagram that seemed to involve both moon phases and powdered crystal beetles. Why would anyone go to all this trouble just to make people sleep? Hermione did not look up. Because sleeping students don't talk, they don't move, they don't interfere. Harry leaned back slightly. So whoever did this wants certain people out of the way. Yes, Hermione said, or wants access to something without being noticed. That thought had troubled her all afternoon. A prank, however cruel, would have been simpler. A stronger potion thrown into a shared drink. Chaos for its own sake. But this was not chaos. The tampering had been clean, deliberate, almost elegant in a cold and unnerving way. Dean Thomas and Ernie Macmillan had not merely been put to sleep. They had been removed. From what? Hermione turned a page, scanning another list of rare additives. Look here, she said suddenly. Several potion binders can deepen magical sleep, but most of them leave obvious traces. Bitter root ash, syrup of hellebore, essence of black poppy, all too detectable. Ron peered at the page with little hope of understanding it. So not those then? Probably not, Hermione said. Slughorn would have recognized them. Harry leaned forward. What wouldn't he recognize? Hermione paused. That was the question, and it was not a comforting one. Something obscure, she said, something not usually taught at school level, or something disguised by the way it was brewed into the base. Ron's expression grew more uneasy, meaning our mystery genius knows more than most students should. Hermione's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the book. Yes. A soft sound interrupted them. Madame Pince, moving like an offended wraith between the shelves, stopped near their table and fixed them with a look that suggested she expected trouble from all three at any moment. There will be no spilled ink, scorched parchment, or whispered dramatics in this section, she said. These books are older than your family names. Ron sat up straighter at once. We're only reading. Madame Pince's narrowed eyes moved to the open volume nearest him. Then do try not to look as though you are losing a duel with it. She swept away again in a rustle of black robes. For a brief moment, despite everything, Harry smiled. Ron muttered something under his breath, and Hermione almost smiled too, but the feeling passed quickly. A shadow fell across the table. Neville stood there, clutching a folded bit of parchment. Hermione, he said quietly, Professor McGonagall asked me to find you. Another student's been taken to the hospital wing. Hermione's heart sank at once. Who? Romilda Vane. Ron let out a breath through his teeth. That makes 3. Neville nodded grimly. McGonagall wants you there. The library seemed to grow colder around them. Hermione closed the book at once. Come on. They left the warm lamplight behind and moved quickly through the castle. The corridors were darker now, lit by torches and the last blue traces of evening through the high windows. Suits of armor gleamed faintly in alcoves. Paintings whispered as the 4 of them passed. When they reached the hospital wing, Madame Pomfrey was already waiting near the entrance, her face drawn with strain. Romilda lay in a bed farther down, pale and motionless, her dark hair spread across the pillow. Dean and Ernie had not moved. The sight struck Hermione harder this time. 3 students in enchanted sleep, lined beneath white sheets, while the lamps burned steadily on, and the castle beyond continued its ordinary business as though nothing had broken. Professor McGonagall stood near the nearest bed. Miss Granger, she said. Miss Vane was found asleep in a window alcove near the 4th floor corridor. No sign of struggle, no witnesses. Hermione moved closer. Had she eaten anything? Been to any lessons? Madame Pomfrey answered. She attended charms, missed supper, and was last seen carrying a goblet from the kitchens. A goblet, Harry repeated. Pomfrey nodded. Pumpkin juice, according to one of the house elves. Hermione's mind sharpened at once. Where is it? Madame Pomfrey pointed to a tray on the side table. Upon it stood a silver goblet, only a little liquid left at the bottom. Hermione crossed to it immediately. With the greatest care, she raised her wand and whispered a testing spell. The dregs at the bottom of the cup glimmered faintly, and then, unmistakably, silver ran through the orange. Harry saw it first. That's your potion. Hermione's stomach tightened. Yes. But again, not entirely hers. The trace was there, the same wrongness at the edges, the same delicate corruption. Her safe sleeping draught had been folded into something deeper and darker. McGonagall's voice was stern. Can you determine how it was administered? Hermione studied the residue. Only that it was mixed into the drink, and recently. The magical signature is still fresh. Ron glanced uneasily toward the ward doors. So now it's definitely being slipped into things. Yes, Hermione said, and that means the victims may not be random after all. Dean in Gryffindor Tower, Ernie in the corridor near the Great Hall, Romilda with a drink from the kitchens. She looked up. There's a pattern, but I can't see it yet. McGonagall turned slightly, her face severe in the lantern light. The headmaster has already ordered that students are not to accept drinks or sweets from unverified sources. Prefects will patrol in pairs. House elves have been warned. Ron muttered, That'll calm everyone down. McGonagall heard him and did not disagree. Calm is not our present condition, Mr. Weasley. Precision will have to serve instead. Hermione barely heard the exchange. Her gaze had fixed on something near Romilda's hand. A faint stain marked the sheet beside her wrist. Not potion. Ink. Hermione bent closer. There, half hidden by a fold in the blanket, lay a scrap of parchment no larger than 2 fingers across. It might easily have been overlooked. What's that? She asked. Madame Pomfrey frowned. I hadn't noticed it. Hermione picked it up carefully. On one side there was nothing. On the other only 3 hurried words, written in dark blue ink. Not the sleeper. Harry stepped nearer. What does that mean? Ron looked baffled. Is it some sort of warning? Hermione stared at the words. The handwriting was cramped and slanted, difficult to place. But the message itself sent a prickling chill along her arms. Not the sleeper. Not the sleeper. As though the sleeping students were not the true target at all. McGonagall's eyes narrowed. Where did Miss Vane get this? No idea, said Harry. Hermione turned the scrap over again, searching for enchantments. There may have been more writing and the rest vanished, or it was torn from a larger note. Neville looked from one face to another. What does it mean? Hermione answered without looking up. It means we may be asking the wrong question. Silence followed her words. She felt it then with sudden clarity, like a door opening in her thoughts. They had been trying to understand why someone would put students to sleep. But perhaps the sleep was not the purpose. Perhaps it was only the method, a means to clear a path, create confusion, conceal movement, while something else happened unnoticed. She looked at Dean, Ernie, and Romilda in turn. 3 students from 3 different houses. No obvious friendship, no shared class beyond the ordinary, no visible connection. Unless their connection was not to one another, but to a place. Hermione straightened so quickly that Ron blinked. What is it? Harry asked. I need to know where each of them was in the hour before they collapsed, Hermione said. Exactly where, not just generally. McGonagall gave a slow nod. That can be arranged. And, Hermione added, clutching the scrap of parchment, I need to compare those places. Ron frowned. To find what? Hermione turned toward the dark windows of the hospital wing, where the night had fully gathered beyond the glass. To find what someone wanted emptied, she said. The words hung in the air, quiet and cold. For one beat of silence, no one moved. Then Madame Pomfrey gave a sharp gasp. All eyes turned. Romilda's fingers had moved. Only slightly, a small trembling curl against the sheet, but enough to make everyone step forward at once. Hermione rushed to the bedside. Romilda? Her eyelids fluttered, but did not open. Her breathing quickened for a moment, and her lips parted as though she were trying to speak through the weight of sleep. A whisper emerged, so faint it was scarcely sound at all. Clock, tower. Then the tension left her hand, and stillness claimed her once more. Harry stared. Did she say clock tower? I think so, Hermione said. McGonagall's expression sharpened. The West Clock Tower passage is locked after dusk. Hermione's mind was already racing ahead. A place emptied, a warning note, a whispered clue from a sleeping girl. Someone had not only stolen her potion, someone was using it to clear a way through Hogwarts itself. And whatever lay waiting in the shadow of the clock tower. It had already drawn them one step closer. Night had settled fully over Hogwarts, wrapping its towers and stone walls in deep blue shadow. The castle, though never truly asleep, had grown quieter still under Professor McGonagall's tightened rules. Torches burned steadily along the corridors, their flames unwavering, as though even the fire itself had been warned to remain vigilant. Hermione stood just outside the hospital wing, the scrap of parchment still in her hand. Not the sleeper. The words refused to leave her thoughts. They pressed against every conclusion, unraveling the certainty she had tried to build. The sleeping students were not the end of the mystery. They were only its surface. Behind her, Harry and Ron waited. So, Ron said in a low voice, we're actually going to the clock tower then. Hermione turned to face him. We have to. Romilda tried to say something. That's the only lead we've got. Harry glanced down the corridor, where the light dimmed into shadow. McGonagall said it's locked after dusk. Yes, Hermione said. Which means if someone needed it empty, they would have to make sure no one was there before it was sealed. Ron frowned. So they put people to sleep nearby to keep them out of the way? Possibly, Hermione said, or to ensure no one noticed them going in. Harry's expression grew serious. Then whatever they're doing it there. Hermione nodded once. Exactly. They moved quickly but quietly through the castle, keeping to the edges of the corridors. Their footsteps echoed faintly against the stone, though they tried to soften them. Every turn seemed sharper, every shadow deeper, as though the castle itself watched their progress. The west wing of Hogwarts was older than most parts of the castle. The walls bore faint cracks, worn smooth by centuries of time. The torches here burned lower, casting longer shadows that stretched like fingers across the floor. At last, they reached it. The entrance to the clock tower passage stood before them, a tall, arched doorway of dark oak, reinforced with iron bands. Above it, carved into the stone, were the faint outlines of gears and pendulums, their shapes softened by age. And as McGonagall had said, it was locked. Hermione stepped forward, examining the door closely. A faint shimmer of magic lay across it, subtle but firm. "Protective enchantment," she murmured. "Not just a physical lock." Ron folded his arms. "Brilliant. So now what?" Hermione did not answer at once. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, recalling the faint residue she had seen in the potion. The altered structure. The binding element. Then she raised her wand. "If someone used my potion to get in here," she said quietly, "they might have used magic similar to it to reinforce the door. Something subtle. Something that wouldn't be noticed." Harry watched her. "Can you break it?" Hermione's eyes opened, steady and determined. "I can try." She whispered a counter-charm, not one meant to force the door open, but one designed to unravel layered magic, thread by thread. The air seemed to tighten around them as the spell took hold. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint silver line appeared along the edge of the door. Hermione's breath caught. "There," she said softly. "That's it." She adjusted the spell, focusing more precisely. The silver line flickered, then dimmed. A soft click echoed through the corridor. Ron blinked. "That's good, right?" Hermione reached out and pushed gently. The door opened. A breath of cold air slipped past them, carrying with it the scent of dust and something older, something long undisturbed. The passage beyond was narrow and dim, lit only by a few scattered torches that flickered weakly against the walls. A spiral staircase wound upward, vanishing into shadow. Harry stepped forward first. "Stay close." They climbed slowly, each step measured. The silence here was different from the rest of the castle. It was deeper, heavier, as though the walls themselves held their breath. Halfway up, Hermione stopped. "Wait." Harry and Ron froze. "What is it?" Harry whispered. Hermione crouched slightly, pointing to the stone step before her. There, faint but unmistakable, was a mark. A scuff. Not old, not worn by time. Fresh. "Someone's been here," she said quietly. Ron swallowed. "Recently?" Hermione nodded. They continued upward. The staircase opened at last into a narrow chamber beneath the great clock face. The gears loomed above them, vast and silent, their shapes outlined in shadow. Moonlight filtered faintly through the glass, casting pale patterns across the floor. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Hermione saw it. On the far side of the room, near the wall, something lay partially concealed beneath a loose stone. She crossed the chamber slowly, her footsteps echoing softly. Harry and Ron followed, their eyes scanning the shadows. Hermione knelt and carefully lifted the stone. Beneath it lay a small object, wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it gently. Inside, a vial. Small, glass, half filled with a faintly glowing liquid. Hermione's heart sank. "It's the potion," she said. Harry stepped closer. "Yours?" She shook her head. "Not exactly." Oh, even in the dim light, she could see the difference. The glow was sharper, colder, the same altered version that had put the others to sleep. Ron frowned. So they were here, making it? Hermione examined the vial more closely. "No," she said slowly. "This wasn't brewed here. It was brought here." Harry looked around the chamber. "Then what were they doing?" Hermione did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned her attention to the floor. There, just beside where the vial had been hidden, was something else. A pattern. Faint lines etched into the stone. Her breath caught. It's a rune circle, she said. Ron blinked. A what? A magical array, Hermione explained, her voice tightening. Used to channel or direct magic. Harry crouched beside her. What kind of magic? Hermione traced one of the lines lightly with her finger. Not offensive, she said. Not defensive either. It's focusing something, gathering it. Ron shifted uneasily. Gathering what? Hermione looked up at him. Magic, she said. The word seemed to echo in the chamber. Harry's gaze moved slowly around the room. So they clear the area, use the potion to make sure no one's here, and then they do something with this circle. Hermione nodded. Yes. Ron swallowed. That's not great, is it? No, Hermione said. It isn't. She rose slowly, her mind racing. The sleeping students, the altered potion, the hidden vial. The rune circle. It was no longer a question of what had been done. It was a question of what was being prepared. And then, a sound. Soft, faint, but unmistakable. Footsteps. From the staircase below. All three of them froze. Harry's hand tightened around his wand. Ron's breath caught. Hermione's heart began to pound. Someone else was coming. And this time, they were not alone. The sound of footsteps rose slowly through the spiral staircase, measured and unhurried, as though the one ascending feared neither discovery nor consequence. Hermione's pulse quickened, but her thoughts sharpened at once. Hide, she whispered. There was no time to argue. Harry moved first, slipping behind one of the great iron supports that held the clock's inner workings. Ron followed, pressing himself into a shadowed corner where the stone wall curved inward. Hermione gathered the vial swiftly, wrapping it once more in its cloth, and tucked it into her bag before retreating behind a stack of old wooden crates near the far side of the chamber. The footsteps grew louder. Step by step. Closer. Then, they stopped. For a single, breathless moment, the silence was complete. Hermione barely dared to breathe. A faint creak broke the stillness as the door at the top of the staircase opened. Pale moonlight shifted, and a figure stepped into the chamber. Cloaked. Still. Watching. Hermione could not see their face. The hood was drawn low, and the dim light concealed more than it revealed. But there was no hesitation in the figure's movement. They crossed the chamber with quiet certainty, as though they had walked this path many times before. They knew this place. Hermione's fingers tightened around her wand. The figure stopped near the rune circle. For a moment they stood there, unmoving. Then, slowly, they raised their wand. A soft incantation slipped into the air, too quiet to catch, yet filled with a strange, resonant cadence. The runes on the floor flickered in response, their faint lines beginning to glow with a pale, silvery light. Hermione felt it at once. Magic. Not wild or chaotic, but drawn together, shaped, guided with careful precision. The air itself seemed to thrum with it, as though the chamber had become the center of something unseen. Harry, from his hidden place, leaned forward ever so slightly. The figure took another step into the circle. And then, they faltered. Only for a heartbeat. But it was enough. Their wand lowered slightly, and their head tilted, as though sensing something amiss. Hermione's breath caught. Had they noticed? The figure turned slowly. Not toward Harry. Not toward Ron. Toward Hermione's hiding place. Time seemed to still. Hermione's mind raced. If they were discovered now. But before she could act, a sudden, sharp sound echoed from below. A door slamming. Voices, distant but unmistakable, rose through the staircase. The figure froze. Then, without hesitation, they extinguished the glow of the rune circle with a swift flick of their wand. The chamber fell back into shadow at once. For a brief moment, they stood perfectly still. Then they moved, quickly now, but without panic. They crossed the room in a few silent steps, reached the far wall, and pressed their hand against the stone. With a low, grinding sound, a narrow section of the wall shifted inward. A hidden passage. Before Hermione could react, the figure slipped inside. The stone closed behind them. The chamber fell silent once more. For several seconds, none of the three dared to move. Then Ron's voice, barely above a whisper, broke the stillness. Did that just happen? Harry stepped out from behind the iron support, his wand still raised. You saw it too. Hermione emerged slowly from her hiding place, her thoughts racing faster than ever. Yes, she said. I saw it. She crossed the chamber at once, moving to the spot where the figure had vanished. Her hands pressed against the stone, searching for any sign of the hidden mechanism. But the wall was smooth, seamless, as though it had never opened at all. There must be a trigger, she murmured, a concealed switch or a specific spell. Ron joined her, peering uncertainly at the stone. Or it just opens for mysterious cloaked people and not for us. Hermione ignored him, her focus unbroken. They knew exactly where to go, she said. That passage wasn't discovered by chance. Harry glanced back toward the rune circle. And they were about to use it again. Hermione turned, following his gaze. The faint traces of magic still lingered in the air, like the echo of a spell not fully cast. They're not finished, she said. Ron let out a slow breath. Brilliant. So now we've got a secret passage, a hidden ritual, and a person who disappears into walls. Hermione straightened, her expression firm. And we know where they're working, she said. Harry nodded. That's something. But not enough, Hermione added. Not yet. She looked once more at the sealed wall, her mind turning over what she had seen. The figure's movements had been precise, controlled. Not hurried, not uncertain. They had done this before. And they had not expected to be interrupted. Which meant, they'll come back, Hermione said. Ron blinked. You're sure? Yes, she replied. Whatever they're doing here, it isn't complete. They'll return to finish it. Harry's grip tightened on his wand. Then we wait for them. Hermione shook her head. No, she said. We prepare for them. Ron frowned. What's the difference? Hermione's eyes moved once more to the rune circle, now dark and lifeless. The next time they come, she said, we need to understand what they're trying to do before they do it. A distant voice echoed faintly up the staircase. Someone was just here. Check the upper levels. Harry's head snapped toward the door. We should go. Hermione nodded. Yes. But as they turned to leave, her gaze lingered on the chamber one last time. On the hidden passage. On the place where the runes had glowed. On the space where the figure had stood. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern. Not yet clear. Not yet complete. But close. Very close. And somewhere beyond that hidden wall, The true purpose of the sleeping potion was waiting to be uncovered. They did not speak until they were well clear of the clock tower. Only when the heavy door had been quietly shut behind them and the dim corridor stretched empty on either side did Hermione allow herself to slow her pace. Even then, her thoughts raced ahead, swift and relentless, fitting each new discovery into place. A hidden passage. A rune circle, a cloaked figure who moved with certainty and vanished without a trace. And always, always, the sleeping potion at the center of it all. Ron exhaled loudly, running a hand through his hair. "Right," he said. "I'd like to officially say this has gone well beyond anything I understand." Harry gave a short nod. Agreed. Hermione stopped walking. They turned to face her. "We're looking at this the wrong way," she said. Ron blinked. "That's not reassuring." Hermione's voice was steady, but there was urgency beneath it now. "We've been trying to figure out who's behind this by following the potion, but the potion isn't the goal, it's the tool." Harry frowned. "We already thought that." "Yes," Hermione said, "but we didn't take it far enough. Think about it. The victims aren't random, but they're not connected in any obvious way either. They're just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Ron's expression shifted slightly. "You mean, they're getting in the way?" "Exactly," Hermione said, "which means the real question isn't who they are." She looked from one to the other. "It's where they were." Harry's eyes sharpened. "And what someone needed access to." Hermione nodded once. "The clock tower was one of those places," she said, "and there must be others." A silence settled over them as the idea took shape. Ron frowned. "So, what? We go around the castle checking every corridor someone's been asleep in?" "Not every corridor," Hermione said, "just the ones that match a pattern." Harry tilted his head slightly. "What kind of pattern?" Hermione began to walk again, slower now, her thoughts unfolding into words. "Think about what we saw," she said. "The rune circle wasn't random. It was carefully placed, hidden, and connected to that passage." Ron nodded reluctantly. "Right." "So what if there are more?" Hermione continued. "More circles, more places where something is being prepared." Harry's expression darkened. "You think they're setting something up across the castle?" "Yes," Hermione said, "piece by piece." Ron let out a low whistle. "That's not good." "No," Hermione agreed. "It isn't." They reached the foot of a staircase and paused. "We need a map," Hermione said suddenly. Ron blinked. "A map?" "Yes," she said. "A full layout of the castle. Every corridor, every tower, every hidden passage if we can find them." Harry's eyes lit faintly with understanding. "To mark where the students were found." "And see if they connect," Hermione finished. Ron gave a weak grin. "Brilliant. A mystery with diagrams. Just what I always wanted." Hermione ignored him, already turning toward the direction of the library. It took time. Longer than Hermione would have liked. The library was quieter now than it had been earlier, nearly empty as most students had been sent to their common rooms. Madame Pince watched them with suspicion, but said nothing as Hermione gathered several large, aged maps of Hogwarts from the restricted shelves. They spread them across a wide table, the parchment crackling softly. Hermione worked quickly, marking each known location with careful precision. "Dean, Gryffindor Tower," she said, placing a small dot. "Ernie, near the Great Hall corridor," Harry added. Hermione marked it. "Romilda, 4th floor near the West Passage," Ron said. Another mark. Hermione stepped back, studying the map. For a moment, nothing stood out. Then, her breath caught. No, she whispered. Harry leaned closer. What is it? Hermione pointed. The 3 points formed a rough triangle across the castle. Not perfect, but deliberate. Ron squinted. That can't be a coincidence, can it? Hermione shook her head slowly. No, it can't. Her finger moved to the clock tower. And this, she said, sits almost exactly at the center. A silence followed. Harry's voice was quiet. So the rune circle we saw wasn't the only one. No, Hermione said. It was just 1 point in a larger design. Ron leaned back, his expression uneasy. What kind of design? Hermione hesitated. Then she said, one that channels magic across distance. Harry's eyes widened slightly. Like a network. Yes, Hermione said. A network of linked points, each one gathering or directing magic toward a central location. Ron looked at the map again. Which is the clock tower? Hermione nodded. That's where it all comes together. The weight of the realization settled heavily over them. Harry's voice was low. So what happens when it's finished? Hermione did not answer immediately. Because she did not know. And that frightened her more than anything. After a moment, she said, whatever it is, it requires precision, timing, preparation. Ron frowned. And sleeping students. Yes, Hermione said, to keep the areas clear, to avoid interference. Harry looked at her. How many more places do you think there are? Hermione glanced back at the map. If this is a full structure, she said slowly, then at least 1 more point is missing. Ron groaned softly. Of course it is. Hermione traced the triangle with her finger, then extended the pattern. There, she said, pointing to a corridor on the opposite side of the castle. If the design is symmetrical, the final point should be somewhere around here. Harry followed her gaze. The East Wing. Ron sighed. Wonderful. Another creepy part of the castle? Hermione rolled up the map with careful hands. We don't have much time, she said. If they complete the last point. She stopped. Harry finished the thought. Then whatever they're planning happens. Hermione nodded. Yes. A distant bell echoed faintly through the castle, marking the late hour. The night was deep now. And somewhere within it, unseen and patient, the final piece was waiting to be set in place. Hermione gathered the map firmly. We find the last point, she said, before they do. And as the 3 of them left the library, the candles flickered softly behind them, as though stirred by a presence that had just passed unseen through the quiet room. The East Wing of Hogwarts was seldom silent, yet that night it seemed to listen. The corridors there were longer and straighter than those in the older parts of the castle, lined with tall windows through which the moon cast pale bars of light upon the floor. Armor stood in patient rows between the alcoves, each helm silvered by the late hour, each visor dark and unreadable. The castle creaked now and then, as old castles do, but the sounds felt smaller in that stillness, as though something greater waited just beyond them. Hermione led the way with the map tucked beneath one arm and her wand lit low in her hand. Harry walked to her left, alert and quiet. Ron followed, muttering under his breath each time a suit of armor shifted the slightest inch, though whether from age or hidden life, none of them could say. "You're sure this is the right area?" he whispered. "As sure as I can be without seeing the full structure," Hermione replied. "The pattern on the map fits. If there's another point, it should be near here." "That's a comforting sort of uncertainty," Ron said. Harry glanced ahead. Quiet. They stopped. Far down the corridor, just past a turning where the moonlight failed, came the faintest sound. Not footsteps this time, not voices. A soft scraping, like stone lightly dragged against stone. Hermione felt the same cold alertness she had felt in the clock tower. She extinguished the light at the tip of her wand with a swift motion, and the three of them slipped into the shadow of an alcove. The scraping came again, then stopped. They waited. A long moment passed. Nothing. Hermione leaned slightly from the alcove and studied the corridor. There, halfway down, hung a tapestry she did not remember noticing before. It showed a group of wizards on broomsticks, hunting some long-forgotten beast across a winter sky. Yet one corner of the tapestry stirred, though no breeze touched it. Harry saw it, too. "There." Hermione nodded. They crossed the corridor slowly, one careful step after another. When they reached the tapestry, Hermione held out a hand and lifted its heavy edge. Behind it was not a doorway, but a narrow recess in the wall, scarcely wider than a broom cupboard. At first it seemed empty. Then Hermione lowered her wand, and its hidden light found something chalked in faint lines upon the stone floor. A circle. Not fully drawn yet. The same flowing runes as in the clock tower, though only half of them had been completed. A small leather case lay open beside it, containing chalk, a silver knife, and a bundle of dried herbs Hermione did not at once recognize. Ron swallowed. "That seems rather bad." Hermione crouched at once, every sense sharpened. "Don't touch anything." Harry stood guard, watching both ends of the corridor while Hermione examined the unfinished circle. "It's the same pattern," she whispered. "Almost identical to the one in the tower, but this one hasn't been activated." Ron peered over her shoulder. "Can you tell what it does?" "Not exactly, but I can tell it belongs to the same array." Her gaze moved over the lines. "And whoever made it was interrupted." Harry looked down. "How can you tell?" Hermione pointed to the chalk. "The final bind rune hasn't been sealed. If it had been, the magic would still be clinging to the stone." Ron shifted uneasily. "So they were here recently." "Yes," said Hermione. "Very recently." She reached for the bundle of herbs and paused, careful not to touch it directly. "These are dreamwort leaves," she said. "Dried and cut very fine." Ron frowned. "And that means?" "It means the sleep potion wasn't only meant to keep people unconscious," Hermione replied. "Dreamwort strengthens the boundary between waking and sleeping minds. It helps hold the victim deeper within enchanted sleep." Harry looked back down the corridor. Then Slughorn was right. This was prepared properly. Hermione's thoughts moved quickly. Yes, but Dreamwort does something else when used in ritual binding. Her voice grew quieter. It can help draw magic through a sleeping person without waking them. Ron stared. "Draw magic from them?" "Not all of it," Hermione said at once. "Nothing like that, but enough to use the state of sleep as an anchor, a sort of magical stillness." Harry looked grim. "So the victims aren't just in the way, they're part of it." Hermione stood very still. The truth of it settled into place with terrible clarity. Dean, Ernie, Romilda. They had not simply been cleared from certain corridors. They had been placed, like weights upon a balance, like fixed points in a design. She rose sharply. We were wrong. Ron blinked. Again. They aren't removing people from key places, Hermione said. They're choosing them to create key places. Harry understood first. The sleepers are part of the pattern. Yes. Hermione turned to the unfinished circle. Their enchanted sleep links the points together. The potion makes them stable. The runes direct the magic through the places where they fell. Her voice tightened. That's why the note said, "Not the sleeper." Whoever wrote it meant the sleeping students weren't the final target. Ron looked at the half-drawn circle, then back at Hermione. So what is? Hermione's answer came slowly, because she feared it already. The center. At that instant, footsteps rang out from the far end of the corridor. Not one person. Several. Harry spun. Someone's coming. They slipped away from the tapestry just as two prefects rounded the corner, lanterns in hand. Behind them strode Professor McGonagall, stern-faced and swift. Potter, Weasley, Miss Granger. Her eyes fell at once on their expressions. What have you found? Hermione wasted no time. She drew back the tapestry again and showed her the recess. McGonagall stepped forward, her face hardening as she saw the unfinished runes. The prefects exchanged alarmed glances. So, McGonagall said quietly, there is another. Hermione nodded. And the sleeping students are not random victims. I think they're being used as magical anchors. McGonagall's gaze sharpened at once. Explain. Hermione did, swiftly and clearly, speaking of the potion, the dreamwort, the linked points on the map, the clock tower circle, the unfinished recess in the east wing. As she spoke, McGonagall's expression grew grimmer with every sentence. When Hermione finished, the professor was silent for a moment. Then she said, if that is true, the center of the array becomes critical. It's the clock tower chamber, Harry said. That's where the figure was. McGonagall turned to him. You saw someone there? Harry nodded. Cloaked, they opened a hidden passage in the wall and vanished. One of the prefects made a startled sound. McGonagall ignored it. And you did not think to inform a professor at once? Ron opened his mouth, but Hermione stepped in before he could worsen matters. We were trying to understand what we'd seen. McGonagall gave her a long look that carried both disapproval and reluctant understanding. At the moment, she said, understanding will serve us better than scolding. Ron gave Harry a tiny, relieved glance. McGonagall studied the unfinished circle. If this point has not yet been sealed, then the work is incomplete. That gives us an advantage. Hermione nodded. But not for long. Whoever was here may come back tonight. Then they will not find this place as they left it. McGonagall raised her wand. Stand back. With a series of precise, powerful motions, she cast enchantments over the recess. The chalked runes dimmed beneath a fine net of blue light. The leather case snapped shut of its own accord. A second spell followed, subtler and quieter, until Hermione could barely sense the magic beneath the stone at all. A concealment ward? Hermione asked. And a trace alarm, McGonagall said. If anyone attempts to complete this circle, I will know. Ron looked impressed despite himself. That's useful. It is also temporary, McGonagall replied. If our unknown adversary is as skilled as Miss Granger believes, they may discover the ward in time. Hermione's mind had already leapt ahead. Then we need to stop the whole structure before they can repair it. McGonagall folded her arms. Agreed. Which means we must know what lies at the center. The prefects were dismissed to strengthen patrols, and within minutes the corridor was silent again, save for the low murmur of the concealment charm humming beneath the tapestry. McGonagall turned back to the three of them. You will tell me everything you have observed from the beginning. No omissions. They did. They told her of Dean's first enchanted sleep, of the trace in Hermione's tampered potion, of Slughorn's warning, of Romilda's whispered words, of the clock tower, the hidden passage, the cloaked figure, and the map's growing pattern. McGonagall listened without interruption, though more than once her jaw tightened. When they had done, she stood in thought for a long moment. At first light, she said at last, the headmaster will be informed of every detail. The hospital wing will be further protected. All food and drink sources will be restricted, and the clock tower will be watched. Hermione hesitated. At first light may be too late. McGonagall met her eyes. You think they mean to act tonight? I don't know, Hermione said honestly. But they're close. The eastern point was almost finished, if they've already found another way in. She did not need to finish. McGonagall's expression remained steady, but there was iron in it now. Then we shall not wait for morning. The professor looked down the corridor, as though seeing through walls and stone to the silent tower beyond. We go to the center, she said. Now. A cold draught moved through the east wing, stirring the edge of the tapestry behind them. The hidden circle lay trapped beneath McGonagall's spell, unfinished and waiting. But the thing toward which it pointed, the thing gathering shape in the heart of the castle, had not yet been stopped. And as they turned and hastened back through the moonlit corridors, Hermione felt in her bones that the next hour would decide everything. They did not return by the main corridors. At McGonagall's command, they took a lesser-used stair that wound sharply downward before turning back toward the western side of the castle. It was a narrow way, lit only by a handful of dim torches, and the air within it was cool and still, as though it had not been disturbed for many years. Faster, McGonagall said quietly, though she did not raise her voice. If they have found another path to the tower, we may already be behind them. Hermione kept pace at once, her mind racing ahead of her steps. Every discovery now pressed against a single, growing certainty. The sleepers were anchors, the runes were channels. The potion bound them all into one design. And the center. The center was the key. They emerged into a corridor not far from the base of the clock tower. The heavy door they had opened before still stood closed, silent and unmoving. McGonagall approached it without hesitation. Stand back. She raised her wand and spoke a precise unlocking charm. Not the subtle unraveling Hermione had used before, but something firmer, more authoritative. The enchantment across the door shimmered brightly, then broke with a sharp crack like thin ice under pressure. The door opened. Cold air rushed out once more. Inside, McGonagall said. They entered together. The spiral staircase rose above them, winding into shadow. Without another word, they began to climb. This time the silence was different. It was not empty. It was waiting. Hermione felt it with every step like a pressure in the air, faint but unmistakable. The higher they climbed, the stronger it became, until even Ron seemed to notice. "Do you feel that?" he whispered. Harry nodded. "Yeah." Hermione did not speak. She already knew. The magic was active. When they reached the top, the chamber lay before them once again, but it was no longer dark. The rune circle glowed. Soft at first glance, but pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat of light beneath the stone. The lines Hermione had seen earlier were now complete, every curve and symbol etched with careful precision. And in the center, the cloaked figure stood. Their back was to the door, their wand was raised. The air around them shimmered, as though drawn inward by an unseen force. For a moment, no one moved. Then McGonagall's voice rang clear and sharp. "That will be quite enough." The figure turned. Slowly, calmly, the hood fell back, and Hermione's breath caught. It was not a stranger, not some hidden intruder from beyond the castle walls. It was someone she knew. "Michael?" Ron blurted. Michael Corner stood within the circle, his expression pale but steady. His wand did not waver. Harry stared. "What are you doing?" Michael did not answer at once. His eyes moved briefly from one to the other, Harry, Ron, Hermione, then settled on McGonagall. "I was wondering when someone would work it out," he said quietly. Hermione took a step forward, despite herself. This was you? The potion, the students?" "They're safe," Michael said at once. "They were never in danger." "That's not true," Hermione replied sharply. "They won't wake." "They will," he said, "when this is finished." Ron stared at him. "Finished? Finished what?" Michael's gaze shifted back to the circle. The light pulsed once more, faint but growing. "You don't understand," he said. "This is the only way." McGonagall's voice cut through the tension like steel. "You will lower your wand at once, Mr. Corner." Michael did not move. "No," he said. The word hung in the air. Harry stepped forward. "Michael, listen. Whatever you think you're doing, this isn't right." Michael's expression tightened, just for a moment. "You think I don't know that?" he said. "You think I wanted this?" Hermione's voice was calmer now, but no less firm. "Then stop. We can fix whatever's wrong without this." Michael let out a quiet, bitter breath. "No," he said again. "You can't." The light in the circle flared slightly. Hermione felt the magic shift, deepen, like a tide drawing inward. "What is it doing?" she demanded. Michael looked at her. "For weeks," he said, "there's been something wrong in this castle. Small things at first. Spells failing where they shouldn't. Charms weakening. You didn't notice because it wasn't obvious." Hermione frowned. "That's not possible. Hogwarts magic is stable." "It was," Michael interrupted, "but not anymore." McGonagall stepped forward, her wand raised. "You will cease this at once." Michael's grip tightened. "I can't," he said. The glow of the circle brightened again. Hermione's mind raced. "You're trying to stabilize it," she said suddenly. "The magic. That's what the network is for." Michael looked at her with something like relief. "Yes." Ron blinked. "Wait. What?" "The runes," Hermione said quickly, her thoughts falling into place. "They're not drawing magic for themselves. They're redistributing it, balancing it across the castle." Harry looked between them. "So this isn't an attack?" "No," Hermione said. Michael nodded. "It's a correction." Ron stared. "Then why put people to sleep?" "Because the structure needs anchors," Michael said. "Fixed points, living magic that won't shift while the balance is restored." Hermione's voice dropped. "So you used my potion?" Michael did not deny it. "I needed something stable," he said. Something that wouldn't harm them. Your work was perfect. Hermione's jaw tightened. You altered it. I had to, he said. It wasn't strong enough on its own. The circle pulsed again. Brighter now. Harry glanced at it. And when it's done? The magic stabilizes, Michael said. Everything returns to normal. Ron frowned. And the sleepers? They wake, Michael said, with no lasting harm. Hermione's eyes narrowed slightly. You're certain of that? Michael hesitated. Only for a moment. But it was enough. No, Hermione said quietly. You're not. The chamber fell silent. The glow of the runes grew stronger, casting pale light across their faces. McGonagall's voice was low, controlled. You have acted without authorization, endangered students, and tampered with forces you do not fully understand. Michael's expression hardened. Someone had to do something. Not like this, she replied. Hermione stepped forward again. How long? She asked. Michael looked at her. Minutes. The answer struck like a blow. The magic in the room deepened, pressing against them now, no longer subtle. Hermione's thoughts raced. If he was right. If the castle's magic truly was destabilizing, then stopping him might make things worse. But if he was wrong, the consequences could be far greater. Harry spoke, his voice steady but urgent. Hermione, what do we do? For a moment, she did not answer. Because for the first time since this began, she did not know. The circle flared brighter still. And somewhere far below, in the quiet stillness of the hospital wing, 3 sleeping students lay caught between 2 possible endings. One of them would wake, or none of them would. The light in the chamber grew stronger with every passing second. It did not blaze like fire, nor flash like lightning. Instead, it deepened, steady, gathering, inevitable. The runes beneath Michael's feet pulsed in slow rhythm, as though the castle itself had begun to breathe through them. Hermione stood at the edge of the circle, her thoughts moving faster than the rising magic. He could be right. That was the most dangerous part. If Hogwarts magic truly was faltering, if something deep within its ancient foundations had shifted, then a structure like this might stabilize it. The runes were precise, the potion was controlled, the anchors were living conduits, held in perfect stillness. It was brilliant. And reckless. Minutes, Harry repeated quietly. That's all we've got. Ron looked from Hermione to the glowing circle. Well then, let's not stand here and admire it. McGonagall's voice was calm, but there was urgency beneath it. Miss Granger, can this be undone safely? Hermione did not answer at once. Her gaze moved across the circle, tracing the lines, reading the structure as it revealed itself under the growing light. The runes were no longer faint etchings. They shone now with layered meaning, each symbol locking into the next, forming a web of purpose that stretched beyond the chamber, beyond the tower, into the very bones of the castle. It's not just one spell, she said at last. It's a sequence, a progression. Michael's voice came quietly from within the circle. Yes. Hermione ignored him, though she felt his gaze on her. The anchors feed the outer points, she continued. The outer points channel toward this one, and this, she gestured to the center, is where the correction happens. Ron frowned. Correction of what, exactly? Hermione's voice dropped. The balance of magic across Hogwarts. Harry looked at her sharply. So if we stop it halfway, It might collapse, Hermione said. Not just here. Everywhere the structure reaches. Ron's face paled. You mean the whole castle? I don't know, Hermione said, but it's possible. Silence fell. The runes pulsed again, brighter than before. McGonagall's grip on her wand tightened slightly. And if it completes? Hermione closed her eyes for the briefest moment. I don't know that either. Michael spoke then, his voice steady but strained. It stabilizes everything. The disturbances stop. The magic returns to what it should be. Hermione opened her eyes and met his gaze. And the sleepers? They wake, he said. You're not sure, Hermione replied. His silence answered her. The air in the chamber grew heavier, charged now with gathered power. The great gears above them, silent for so long, gave a faint, slow shift, as though stirred by something deep within the tower itself. Harry stepped closer to Hermione. We need a decision. She knew he was right. Every moment they hesitated, the magic grew stronger. The structure moved closer to completion. Hermione looked again at the circle. At the lines. At the way they held together. Not rigid, but balanced. Flexible, yet precise. And then she saw it. A flaw. Small. Subtle. But there. Wait, she whispered. Harry turned to her. What? Hermione stepped closer to the edge of the circle, her eyes fixed on a single point among the glowing runes. There, she said. Ron leaned in. I don't see anything. It's not obvious, Hermione said. But that rune, just there, it's slightly misaligned. The angle is wrong by a fraction. Michael's expression changed. How? You copied the base from my potion, Hermione said, her voice sharpening. But you adjusted it for the structure, and you made an assumption. Michael shook his head. No. I checked it, twice. Not like this, Hermione said. Not under full activation. The rune flickered. Only slightly. But now that she had seen it, she could not unsee it. That flaw will amplify as the magic builds, Hermione continued. It won't stabilize anything, it will distort it. Michael's face went pale. No, he said. That's not possible. Hermione's voice was firm. It is. The circle pulsed again. This time the flicker spread, just for an instant, before settling. Harry saw it. Hermione. Yes, she said. It's already starting. Ron stepped back. So if it finishes... It won't correct the magic, Hermione said. It will unbalance it further, everywhere at once. A heavy silence fell. Michael's wand wavered. You're wrong, he said, though there was doubt in his voice now. You have to be. I'm not, Hermione replied. You didn't account for the interaction between the binding agent and the rune structure. It's too delicate. One error is enough. The light in the chamber surged suddenly, brighter than before. The flaw flickered again. Longer this time. McGonagall stepped forward. Mr. Corner, you will end this immediately. Michael did not move. I can't, he said. If I stop it now, the backlash could... Be contained, Hermione interrupted. If we redirect it. He looked at her, desperate now. How? Hermione's mind raced. There was a way. There had to be. She looked again at the circle, at the flawed rune, at the flow of magic converging toward the center. Then she saw it. We don't stop it, she said. Harry blinked. What? We finish it, Hermione said. But correctly. Ron stared. You're joking. I'm not, she said. The structure is already active. If we break it now, the magic will scatter. But if we adjust it, if we fix the flaw before it reaches full power, then the correction might still work. McGonagall's eyes narrowed. And the risk? Hermione did not hesitate. Hi. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Michael looked at the rune again, then back at Hermione. You can fix it? He asked. Hermione met his gaze. Yes, she said. Harry stepped closer. What do you need? Hermione drew a steady breath. I need time, she said, and I need him to hold the structure steady while I adjust the rune. Ron groaned softly. Of course you do. The light surged again. Stronger now. Closer to its peak. McGonagall's voice was firm. Then you will begin at once. Hermione stepped forward to the very edge of the glowing circle. The magic pressed against her now, alive and powerful, humming through the air like a storm waiting to break. She raised her wand. And as she did, she knew. This was the moment. Not of discovery. Not of pursuit. But of decision. The flaw would either be corrected, or it would tear the magic of Hogwarts apart. The chamber seemed to narrow around them, as though the very walls of the tower leaned inward to witness what would follow. Hermione stepped into the edge of the circle. At once, the magic surged against her like a rising tide. It pressed at her senses, not violently, but with a weight that demanded attention, a force shaped by intention, yet no longer entirely under control. Hold it steady, she said to Michael, her voice calm despite the strain. Whatever you do, don't let the flow change. Michael's grip tightened on his wand. It's already building. I know, Hermione said. Just keep it consistent. Harry stood just outside the circle, his wand raised, though there was nothing yet to strike against. Ron hovered beside him, visibly uncertain, but unwilling to retreat. Professor McGonagall remained still, watchful, her presence like an anchor of its own. Hermione knelt slightly, bringing her wand close to the flawed rune. Now that she stood within the circle, she could feel it clearly. The misalignment was not only visual, it pulsed faintly out of rhythm with the rest, a single note out of harmony in an otherwise perfect design. And that single flaw was enough. The runes brightened again, their light sharpening. Hermione, Harry said, his voice tight. How long? Not long, she replied. If I get it right the first time. Ron let out a weak breath. Comforting. Hermione ignored him, focusing entirely on the rune. She could not erase it. Not now. The structure was too far advanced. Any attempt to break it would ripple outward through the entire array. No. She had to correct it in place. She raised her wand, drawing a slow breath to steady her hand. Michael, she said, on my mark, reduce the flow slightly, just enough to give me room to adjust it. He nodded, though his expression was strained. Ready? Hermione's eyes did not leave the rune. Now. The change was immediate. The pressure in the air lessened, not gone, but softened, like a storm pulling back for a single breath. The rune flickered, its light dimming just enough. Hermione moved. Her wand traced a fine, precise line through the air, not touching the stone but guiding the magic that clung to it. She whispered an incantation under her breath, one designed not to break or overpower, but to realign, to nudge the existing structure into harmony. The rune resisted. For a moment, it held its flawed shape, trembling against her correction. Then, it shifted. Only slightly. But enough. The light steadied. Hermione exhaled sharply. Again. Michael adjusted the flow once more. Hermione refined the line, her wand moving with greater precision now. The rune responded more easily this time, as though recognizing the pattern it was meant to follow. The flicker faded. The pulse aligned. For one brief, perfect moment, the entire circle fell into balance. The light changed. Not brighter. Not stronger. But clearer. Like a note struck true at last. Harry saw it first. Hermione. I know, she said. The structure had stabilized. But it was not yet complete. The magic surged again, rising toward its final point. Hold it, Hermione said. Michael nodded, though his face was pale with effort. I am. The runes around the circle began to glow in sequence, one after another, as though awakening. Lines of light stretched outward from the center, threading through the unseen pathways of the castle. Hermione could feel them. The connections. The anchors. Dean. Ernie. Romilda. Their enchanted stillness held the structure firm, allowing the magic to pass through them without resistance. And now, that magic was returning. Not in force, but in balance. The pressure in the chamber shifted again, not heavier, but steadier, like a storm settling into calm. Ron blinked. Is that good? Hermione did not answer at once. She was listening. Not with her ears, but with her mind, attuned to the flow she had just corrected. The imbalance was gone. The distortion had ceased. The structure held. Yes, she said at last. It's working. A low, deep sound echoed through the tower. Above them, the great gears stirred, not violently, but with a slow, deliberate motion, as though long-stilled mechanisms had been gently set back into place. The circle flared once more. And then it dimmed. The light did not vanish all at once. Instead, it faded gradually, the runes losing their glow one by one until only the faintest traces remained upon the stone. The air grew still. The pressure lifted. Silence returned. Michael lowered his wand. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ron let out a long, unsteady breath. Tell me that's over. Hermione straightened slowly. It is, she said. Harry looked around the chamber. And the sleepers? As if in answer, a faint tremor passed through the air. Not here. Elsewhere. Far below. In the quiet of the hospital wing. Hermione felt it, a gentle release, like a knot loosening at last. They're waking, she said. Relief washed through the room. Ron sank slightly against the wall. Brilliant. I'd very much like never to do that again. Harry gave a small, tired smile, but Hermione's gaze had already turned back to the circle. Now dark. Now still. The structure had done what it was meant to do. But it had come far too close to doing something else. She looked at Michael. You should have told someone, she said. His shoulders sagged, the tension leaving him at last. I tried, he said quietly. No one believed me. Hermione's expression softened, only slightly. That doesn't make this right. I know, he said. McGonagall stepped forward, her voice firm once more. Mr. Corner, you will come with me. Michael nodded, offering no resistance. As he followed her toward the staircase, he He paused briefly beside Hermione. "You were right," he said. Hermione met his gaze. "Yes," she replied, "but we were also lucky." He gave a faint, tired nod. Then he was gone. Harry looked at Hermione. "So, that's it?" Hermione glanced once more at the darkened runes, then towards the hidden wall where the passage lay unseen. "No," she said quietly. Ron groaned. "Why not?" Hermione's voice was calm, but certain. "Because whatever caused the imbalance in the first place," she said, "is still out there." The silence that followed was not fearful. But it was not entirely at peace either. The danger had passed. The students would wake. The castle would stand. But the mystery, the deeper one, had not yet been fully answered. Dawn came slowly over Hogwarts, pale and silver at first, then touched with gold along the highest towers. After the long night, the sight of morning felt almost strange, as though the castle had crossed some dark river and returned, quiet and worn, to familiar land. Hermione had not slept. Neither had Harry nor Ron, though Ron had tried more than once to close his eyes in a chair outside the hospital wing, and had been startled awake each time by the creak of a door or the rustle of Madame Pomfrey's robes. Now the lamps in the ward burned low beside the growing light from the windows, and the stillness that had weighed upon the room for so many hours had changed. It no longer felt like enchantment. It felt like recovery. Dean Thomas stirred first. It was only a small movement at the beginning, a tightening of his brow, the shifting of one hand against the blanket. Then his breathing changed. His eyelids fluttered. And at last, with a soft sound of confusion, he opened his eyes. Madame Pomfrey was at his side in an instant. "Don't sit up too quickly," she said, though her relief was plain to hear. "You've been under a deep, magical sleep." Dean blinked at her. "What?" His voice was hoarse and uncertain, as though he had been speaking in dreams and had forgotten how waking worked. A moment later, Ernie Macmillan woke with a great gasp that made Ron jump in his chair, and Romilda Vane followed not long after, murmuring half-formed words before fully opening her eyes to the brightening room. For a little while, everything became movement and questions. Madame Pomfrey hurried from bed to bed, checking pupils, pulse, reflexes, and wand response. Dean kept asking what day it was. Ernie wanted to know why everyone looked so dreadful. Romilda, though pale, was more alert than the others, and stared at Hermione as though trying to remember something important that remained just out of reach. Professor McGonagall arrived soon after sunrise, her face stern as ever, though Hermione thought the lines at the corners of her eyes had softened by the slightest measure when she saw the three students awake. "They are recovering well," Madame Pomfrey said, with the careful satisfaction of one who had been prepared for a far worse ending. "Weak, of course, a little disorientation, but no lasting magical injury that I can detect." Ron let out a breath so large it was almost theatrical. "Good." McGonagall's gaze moved toward Hermione. "Miss Granger." A word. Hermione followed her out of the ward and into the corridor, where the early light lay cool upon the stone floor. Harry and Ron came as well, though neither spoke. For a few moments, McGonagall said nothing. She looked down the corridor toward a window where the sky had begun to turn bright above the grounds. "At times," she said at last, "you three possess an astonishing talent for involving yourselves in matters beyond your station." Ron opened his mouth, thought better of it, and closed it again. McGonagall continued, "At other times, that same talent proves exceedingly useful." It was as near to praise as one could generally expect from her. Hermione inclined her head. Professor, what will happen to Michael? McGonagall's expression grew grave once more. That depends on several things. He has admitted what he did. He did not intend harm, but intent does not erase recklessness. She paused. The headmaster will decide the formal consequences. Harry frowned slightly. But he was right about the castle's magic being unstable. Yes, McGonagall said. In part. Hermione looked up at once. In part. McGonagall studied her. The disturbance was real. That much has already been confirmed. What Mr. Corner lacked was the wisdom to understand its cause before attempting to correct it himself. Hermione's thoughts sharpened. You know what caused it? Not yet fully, McGonagall said, but we know where to begin. With that, she led them not back into the hospital wing, but toward the staircase that rose to the higher western passages. The castle was beginning to wake around them now. House elves moved quietly in distant halls. A few early students crossed their path, pausing in surprise at the sight of McGonagall marching through the corridors with Harry, Ron, and Hermione in tow. They did not stop until they reached the hidden chamber beneath the clock tower once more. It looked different by daylight. The moonlit mystery of the night had given way to a colder clarity. Dust showed plainly along the edges of the stone. The old iron supports seemed less spectral now, merely ancient and worn. The rune circle remained upon the floor, dark and lifeless. The hidden passage in the wall had been opened already. The stone stood parted, revealing a narrow way descending into shadow. Two professors waited there. Flitwick, grave but keen-eyed, and Professor Slughorn, looking more troubled than Hermione had ever seen him. McGonagall gestured toward the opening. This passage was searched after dawn, she said. What was found there explains rather more than we would have liked. They entered single file. The hidden corridor was narrow, sloping downward through the stone behind the tower wall. The air within it was dry and stale, and the silence was broken only by the echo of their footsteps. After a short descent, the passage widened into a small chamber cut from rough rock. Shelves had been placed along the walls. Not many, but enough. And on them sat bottles, notes, wrapped bundles of ingredients, old tools for carving runes, and several stacked books whose cracked bindings suggested considerable age. Ron stared. He made himself a whole workshop. Not entirely, said Slughorn softly. Hermione turned toward him. Slughorn moved to one of the shelves and carefully lifted a book from it. Dust rose faintly as he did so. On the cover, nearly worn away, was stamped the crest of Hogwarts. This chamber, he said, was once used generations ago by a small number of advanced students permitted to study castle warding and structural magic. It fell out of use long before any of us were here. Most staff no longer remember it exists. Harry looked around. Michael found it? Yes, said Flitwick, likely by accident at first. But once he did, he found old notes, fragments, enough to lead a clever student into very dangerous confidence. Hermione stepped closer to the shelves. There were parchments everywhere, some old and brittle, others newly written in Michael's hand. Diagrams of Hogwarts, sequences of runes, pages copied from older sources. Then her gaze fell upon something else. A ledger. Not magical calculations. Not rune work. Names. Student names. Dean Thomas, Ernie Macmillan, Romilda Vane. Others, too, crossed out, replaced, moved aside with careful consideration. Hermione felt a chill. He chose them, she said quietly. McGonagall nodded. Based on where and when he believed he could place them without immediate suspicion. Ron's expression darkened. So he planned all of it. Yes, said McGonagall, though not, I think, with cruelty in mind. Hermione looked at the ledger, then at the old shelves, then back toward the dark line of the passage they had come through. Something still did not fit. She moved deeper into the chamber. On the far wall, half hidden behind a stack of old boxes, she saw another mark carved into the stone. Not one of Michael's runes, older, sharper, deliberate in a different way. Hermione brushed dust from it with her sleeve. It was a sigil. Small, complex, interwoven with lines so fine they were nearly invisible. Flitwick stepped up beside her and grew still. That, he said softly, should not be here. Hermione turned. What is it? His face had gone serious in a way that was almost unsettling on so small and usually lively a man. It is not part of the warding notes, he said, nor of Mr. Corner's work. Slughorn came closer and looked too. Good heavens. Ron frowned. Could someone explain? Hermione studied the sigil more closely, her mind reaching through memory. Ancient magical notation, hidden influence. Contained interference. Then she understood. It's a siphon mark, she said. Harry stared. A what? A magical leeching sigil, Hermione replied, her voice tightening. Not enough to drain power outright, but enough to disrupt balance over time, slowly, quietly. McGonagall's eyes narrowed. Placed here deliberately? Hermione nodded. Yes, and likely years ago. Maybe longer. A hush fell over the chamber. Then Harry said, So Michael didn't cause the instability? No, Hermione said. He only found the symptoms. Flitwick touched the stone near the sigil without quite touching it. This is old craftsmanship, hidden deeply. Whoever placed it understood Hogwarts' magical foundations. Ron looked uneasy. You mean someone did this on purpose? To the whole castle? Perhaps not the whole castle, said Flitwick, but enough to weaken a key point in its structure. Hermione looked again at the mark. The edges of it had worn with time, but not enough. It had endured, feeding tiny imbalances into the castle year after year. And Michael, stumbling upon the old chamber and the signs of weakness, had tried to mend what he had not broken. Wrongly, dangerously, but not maliciously. McGonagall drew herself up. This chamber will be sealed. The sigil will be studied and removed properly. No student will enter here again. Slughorn glanced at Hermione. And Mr. Corner? McGonagall was silent for a moment. Disciplined, she said at last, but not cast aside. A student foolish enough to attempt such a correction alone is dangerous. A student capable of seeing the problem in the first place may yet be taught better. That, too, seemed just. Hermione gave the sigil one last look before stepping away. The true cause had been hidden beneath the story all along. Not the potion, not the sleepers, not even Michael's reckless scheme, but an older wound in the castle itself, concealed behind stone and dust. The adventure had not ended in darkness, but it had come nearer to it than anyone had known. As they climbed back toward the morning light, Hogwarts no longer felt bewitched by fear. It felt tired, recovering, wounded in some hidden place, but healing. And for the first time since Dean had failed to wake, Hermione allowed herself to believe that the end was truly near. The days that followed passed not in silence, but in a slow return to ordinary life. At first, the change was subtle. The castle still held a trace of tension, like a storm that had only just moved beyond the horizon. Students spoke a little more softly than before, and glances lingered longer in corridors. But no one else fell asleep. No whispers of new danger spread through the halls. And little by little, Hogwarts remembered itself. The great hall filled once more with the lively hum of conversation. The enchanted ceiling reflected clear skies instead of dim uncertainty. Owls came and went in their usual fluttering patterns, and even the suits of armor seemed less watchful, as though satisfied that their silent duty had been fulfilled. Hermione sat at the Gryffindor table one morning, her books open as always, though she found herself reading the same line twice without noticing. Across from her, Ron was explaining, with great confidence and very little accuracy, how he had almost single-handedly saved the entire castle. Harry listened with an amused expression. "I distinctly remember Hermione doing most of the saving," he said. Ron waved this aside. "Details?" Hermione allowed herself the smallest smile, though her thoughts drifted again, as they often had in recent days. The sigil. The hidden chamber. The imbalance that had gone unnoticed for so long. She had returned there once, under supervision, when Professor Flitwick and several others had begun the careful work of dismantling the siphon mark. It had not been a simple process. The sigil had been woven into the stone itself, anchored deep within the magical structure of the castle. But it had been removed. Carefully. Completely. And with its removal, the faint disturbances Michael had sensed had ceased entirely. The castle's magic, old, layered, and powerful beyond easy understanding, had settled once more into its natural balance. Yet Hermione could not quite forget how close things had come. "How is he?" Harry asked quietly. Hermione looked up. "Michael?" Harry nodded. "He's all right," she said. "Professor McGonagall assigned him detentions, a great many of them." Ron snorted. "Deserved." "Yes," Hermione said, "but he's also been allowed to continue his studies, under supervision." Harry leaned back slightly. "That sounds fair." Hermione nodded. "It is." She hesitated, then added, "He was wrong to do what he did, but he wasn't wrong about everything." Ron frowned. "Still nicked your potion." "That too," Hermione said, though there was no real sharpness in her voice now. There was a pause. Then Harry said, "You fixed it." Hermione looked at him. "The circle," he continued. "The flaw, everything. If you hadn't—" Hermione shook her head gently. "We all did what we could." Ron raised an eyebrow. "You did the dangerous bit." "And you didn't run away," Hermione replied. Ron considered this. "Fair point." A small, quiet laughter passed between them. The moment was simple. Ordinary. And all the more valuable for it. That evening, Hermione returned alone to the Gryffindor common room after finishing her work. The fire burned low, casting warm light across the familiar chairs and tables. A few students lingered, but most had already gone up to bed. Her corner by the window stood as it always had. Her notes lay neatly stacked. And there, beside them, rested a small, sealed vial. Her sleeping potion. The original. Untouched now. Hermione sat down slowly, her gaze resting on it. For a long moment she did nothing. Then she reached out and lifted the vial, holding it up to the firelight. The liquid within shimmered softly, calm and controlled, exactly as she had intended when she first brewed it. Safe. Measured. Purposeful. She turned it slightly, watching the way the light moved through it. A tool. Nothing more. Nothing less. What mattered was how it was used. Hermione set it down again with care. Her quill lay nearby. She picked it up and drew a fresh piece of parchment toward her. For a moment, she hesitated, then began to write. Not just notes this time. Not only measurements and refinements, but observations, warnings, adjustments. What could be improved? What must never be overlooked again? Her writing moved steadily, each word clear and deliberate. The fire crackled softly behind her. The castle breathed its quiet, ancient rhythm. And outside, beyond the high windows, the night stretched calm and untroubled over the grounds. When at last Hermione set down her quill, she felt something she had not felt since the beginning of it all. Certainty. Not that every mystery had been solved. Not that danger would never return. But that when it did, she would be ready. She rose, gathered her things, and extinguished the last of the candles. As she climbed the staircase to the dormitory, the castle stood silent around her, not with unease, but with rest. Hogwarts endured, as it always had. Wounded at times. Tested often. But never truly broken. And somewhere deep within its ancient walls, where old magic and memory intertwined, the last traces of imbalance faded into nothing at all. The sleepers had awakened. The danger had passed. And the story, for now, had reached its end.
Привітики, трошки живої розмови. Це все, що я для вас зробив, завуалював так, щоб занурити вас максимально в історію. Дивіться, тут мене зачепив момент, коли Герміона зрозуміла, що проблема не в самій останній настоянці, а в тому, що хтось використав її працю зовсім для іншої мети. Ми часто віримо, що небезпечним є лише погані наміри або відверто злі вчинки. Але правда трохи складніша. Іноді найбільші проблеми починаються не через щось погане, а через щось хороше, що потрапило не в ті руки або було використано без мудрості і відповідальності. Герміона створювала свій напів, щоб допомагати, щоб зробити сон безпечнішим, і саме тому вона спершу не могла повірити, що її власна робота стала частиною найнебезпечнішої загадки. Мені здається, у житті так само недостатньо просто зробити щось добре. Важливо, щоб подумати, які наслідки може мати наша праця, наші слова чи наші рішення, коли вони виходять за межі нашого контролю. Справжня зрілість починається не тоді, коли ми навчилися створювати щось цінне, а тоді, коли беремо відповідальність і за те, як це можна вплинути на інших. І тому мудрість – це не лише вміння робити добро, а й здатність передбачати, куди воно може привести. З вами був ваш професор Саламандр. Я зараз тут під таким ніком. Бережіть не тільки свої вчинки, а й той слід, який вони залишили після себе. Дякую за увагу. До наступних зустрічей.